For more than 3 decades, the Missouri Compromise had drawn a clear line across the Louisiana Territory: slave states to the south, free states to the north. By the 1850s, the pressures of Western expansion, party politics, and ambition began to erase that line. In January 1854, Senator Stephen Douglas of Illinois introduced what was then called the Nebraska Bill, later known as the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Douglas had hoped for a peaceful way to handle the matter of slavery in the new territories. Instead, he delivered a rehearsal for the Civil War. On the surface, the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act simply organized the land west of Missouri and Iowa into 2 territories, Kansas and Nebraska. Beneath the surface, however, Stephen Douglas was navigating a far more complicated and potentially dangerous route. Douglas proposed a 3-part Western development plan: territorial organization, free land for settlers through a homestead law, and a transcontinental railroad passing through Illinois. He hoped Chicago would be the starting point in the East. Many Northern politicians hoped the Missouri Compromise restriction on slavery could remain in force. Douglas, however, needed Southern support. To secure it, he embraced popular sovereignty, letting settlers decide for themselves whether to allow slavery. To Southern Democrats, even this was insufficient. Douglas assumed, incorrectly, that slavery would not take root in Kansas or Nebraska. Nebraska, largely unpopulated, remained peaceful. Kansas, however, became a flashpoint. Once his bill became law in May 1854, settlers on both sides of Kansas flooded into the territory, each determined to control its future. The results were catastrophic. In March 1855, hundreds of armed Missourians crossed the border to vote illegally in the first territorial election, intended to form the first territorial legislature in Kansas. Just before the election, a census counted 2,905 eligible voters in the territory. However, illegal voters overwhelmed the polling places, and more than 6,000 total votes were cast. As a result of the voter fraud, the pro-slavery faction came to power in Kansas. They selected Lecompton, a small settlement in eastern Kansas, as the territorial capital and the seat of their government. Lawrence, Kansas, became the center of free state activity, hosting newspapers, meetings, and leaders opposed to the pro-slavery legislature. From March to July 1855, the pro-slavery legislature, what free state Kansans dubbed the bogus legislature, passed harsh pro-slavery laws, including severe restrictions on abolitionist activity. In May 1856, border ruffians burned buildings and destroyed an abolitionist press in Lawrence. The sack of Lawrence ignited a guerrilla war, now remembered as Bleeding Kansas. Groups of anti-slavery fighters known as Jayhawkers emerged mostly out of northeast Kansas, where free state towns like Lawrence and the future state capital, Topeka, were located. They conducted counter-raids on pro-slavery towns. Days after the sack of Lawrence, in the Pottawatomie Massacre, John Brown and his sons murdered 5 pro-slavery men along Pottawatomie Creek. The 5 victims did not own slaves, nor did most pro-slavery settlers on either side of the Kansas border. On May 19th and 20th, Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner delivered a fiery speech titled "The Crime Against Kansas." He accused Douglas and others of enabling slavery's expansion. 2 days later, South Carolinian Democratic Representative Preston Brooks entered the Senate chamber and nearly beat Sumner to death with his cane. Southerners celebrated Brooks. hundreds of replacement canes were sent in his support. The city of Charleston delivered one with the inscription, "Hit 'em again." In 1857, at the Lecompton Constitutional Convention, which Free State Kansans boycotted, the Lecompton Constitution was drafted and adopted, which would have guaranteed pro-slavery control of Kansas. In 1858, however, Kansans were finally allowed a genuine choice. This time, free from cross-border interlopers, they overwhelmingly rejected slavery and the Lecompton Constitution. Still, President Buchanan, who feared civil war breaking out under his administration, favored striking a deal with Kansans. Accept the pro-slavery Lecompton Constitution as a condition for becoming a state. Stephen Douglas opposed the terms, since he thought the Lecompton Constitution, drafted by an illegitimate convention, violated the principle of popular sovereignty. The people of Kansas should decide the matter of slavery, he thought, but not under the coercive law adopted by the Lecompton Convention. On March 23, 1858, the U.S. Senate voted to admit Kansas as a slave state under the Lecompton Constitution. In April, a coalition of Northern Republicans and anti-Lecompton Democrats in the House of Representatives blocked admission and instead voted to resubmit the Lecompton Constitution to a popular vote in Kansas. For a second time, Kansans rejected the Lecompton Constitution by an overwhelming margin. Kansas would remain a free territory until January 29, 1861, when it was officially admitted as a free state, just 1 month after South Carolina seceded from the Union. In 1865, the University of Kansas was established in Lawrence. In the late 1800s, newspapers and student publications referred to athletic teams as Jayhawkers. The term was gradually shortened to Jayhawks. In 1958, the Jayhawk was officially recognized as the university mascot for sports teams.